March 14, 2012, my son Thomas lost his battle with the disease of addiction. I now belong to a club that no parent should ever belong to. Do you know the signs? Do you know the trends that children are doing in today's world? Do you know the signs and symptoms? Do you know the signs and symptoms of drug abuse? I want to empower and educate Long Islanders by bringing a force of professionals and how to prevent the disease of addiction. Long Island in Crisis. Good evening and welcome to Long Island in Crisis. This show is about substance use disorder and how the disease affects the family, the person struggling with the disease, and everyone else that's concerned with the person struggling. We just want to educate and empower everyone that's listening to know the signs and symptoms, to know what's going on within your own family. We're losing a generation of kids. I lost my 21-year-old son 4 years ago, and the epidemic grows exponentially every single day. So it is your kid, it is my kid. There's no one that's immune to this disease and the fallout from it. So my special guest tonight is Dr. Michael Delman, and we're going to talk about some signs and symptoms and, what do you do? What's the roadmap?
So it's a really important question, Linda. New York State, we're losing at least 1 to 2 people every day. That sounds terrible, but I will tell you that what's even worse is that the country is losing 1 person every 20 minutes to substance overdose. That includes both prescription pills as well as illegal medications. The other fact that is actually a bad fact, but it's generating a lot of support for the efforts to curb this epidemic, is the fact that the estimated cost of substance use disorders, which means the abnormal use of any medication or illegal drug, so both legal and illegal drugs, is costing the country at least $700 billion a year. That's close to $1 trillion. In fact, it may be $1 trillion because the $700 billion is 2014 data, and we're in 2016. So, given a little inflation,
Absolutely.
we could be up to $1 trillion. So, it's really a major social problem, and it is of epidemic proportions in certain areas of the country. Suffolk County being the epicenter for New York State in terms of illegal drugs, heroin use. However, the use of legal medications, the risky use of it is rampant throughout the country.
Yes.
So we frequently, if we have an illness or an ailment that we can't get to the doctor from, but we know that a friend or a relative has a pill that may help, hey, let me try one of your pills? It's probably not a good idea. I mean, it's done. It's very difficult to stop, but it's a bad idea, especially when we look at the number of interactions that pills have with each other and with, in particular, alcohol and other agents of that nature. If you go to a drugstore now to fill a prescription, you usually get almost a book on all of the possible side effects. So you can imagine.
And counsel.
Right.
And you're offered counseling anyway,
And so you can imagine what happens when you're taking something that nobody knows you're taking, even if it's legal. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, of course, is the illegal use of medications. And while that may not, surprisingly enough, approach the death rate of tobacco, which is a legal addiction, there being about 480,000 deaths a year being attributed to nicotine and tobacco. Maybe I shouldn't say nicotine anymore because the jury is still out on the vapors. And although we know that it does cause some harm, we just don't know yet what it does and how it compares. Having said that, we still have a lot of other drugs that are not legal that are being used. Of course, heroin is the one everybody knows about,
Yes.
but of course, there's also marijuana, which is legal in some states now and
And
semi-legal in others.
parents, for some reason, have a comfort level with marijuana.
Yes,
Marijuana is not marijuana that it used to be.
yes,
And I
correct.
know way too many parents that their children are in
Yeah.
mental institutions having had psychotic breaks.
Yes.
They're not coming back from smoking once.
Well, there is no question that marijuana nowadays can unmask schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, a mental disease that usually develops in the mid to late 20s, can develop in the late teens in kids who smoke marijuana. So when the marijuana doesn't produce schizophrenia, it can unmask it at an early stage, and in addition to that, it can worsen the disease even though it's being controlled with medication because of the concurrent use of marijuana.
Can it unmask, and can it also, that disease could stay dormant? Doesn't necessarily have to become active.
There's no
correct?
question that there are people who do not develop signs and symptoms of schizophrenia until later on in life. Nevertheless, having used this agent in particular, because we've studied it, and possibly other agents too, but with respect to marijuana, yes, there is no question that it can precipitate the onset of the disease. And that's been fairly well reported on some large numbers of people, even though there may not be a study. You can't take a group of people potentially schizophrenic and say, smoke marijuana to see whether we can make you sick, as opposed to another group that doesn't. So it's really, collective data that we're using for this. But you mentioned something in the beginning, which I think people tend to gloss over, and that is that, back in the 60s and 70s when the flower children were smoking pot surreptitiously, and only the certain fraction of them were actually doing that, and it was behind closed doors, and it was
They
sort of
probably
sneaky.
grew it.
And at the time they were smoking the stems and the leaves, nobody smoked the flower.
Right.
But as a result of the development of botanical husbandry, what's happened now is that the flower is what's being used, and the flower has an alkaloid content of better than 400% more than what was done in the 60s and 70s. That's issue number one. Issue number two is not being satisfied with that. There are now techniques like waxing and things like
Yes.
that actually increase those concentrations to numbers that are unheard of, and we don't really know yet how that's going to affect anybody. In fact, there are a lot of people who are jumping on the bandwagon yelling that we should be using marijuana to take care of seizure disorders. Well, the component of marijuana that seems to have the anti-seizure activity is called cannabidiol. And that is only one of the alkaloids. The other one that we know very well is the THC. That's the one that affects your brain in certain ways. There are 78 other alkaloids. We don't know what they do, but they're in there. So there's a whole bunch of things. So it's hard for a doctor to prescribe something. He doesn't know the content, the strength. He doesn't know what's in it, et cetera. And in fact, even in the states that have legalized it, there aren't a lot of doctors that were willing to write for it because it's a violation of everything they've been taught in pharmacology to do that.
I can imagine.
So that's issue one. Issue two is that people don't recognize the fact that there are various components of the plant, some of which are good and some of which are of either, if you're lucky, of no value, and some of which are terrible. So if you take a little kid with a seizure disorder and give him cannabidiol, that would be one thing. But to give him marijuana with enough cannabidiol to take care of his seizures, you by definition are giving him enough THC to make him high, and that's not healthy in a teenage brain.
It's not healthy,
yeah.
right. And in younger children, too, that would be...
So, the younger brain is still in a developmental process, which doesn't really complete until about age 25. So exposure to some of these agents is capable of changing the development of the brain in terms of the neurocircuitry. It starts to get a little complicated when you start to use big words like that. But what it really means is that There are parts of the brain that are still developing. One of those parts is the area of the brain that says this is risky, this is worth the risk, this is not worth the risk. I
Okay.
call that the prefrontal cortex. And all of the viewers tonight would recognize that if they're over age 25 or so, that there were things they did when they were 17 and 18 that they would never dream of doing now.
Yes.
And the question that they never ask themselves is, why is it that I was willing to do it then and not willing to do it now? That's the prefrontal cortex. It's been developing. It gives you a much better perspective on risk, reward, and
Yes.
and the alternatives. So that becomes a
teenagers
problem.
also, and you raised children, what were you thinking? They really aren't thinking anything. They really aren't thinking, period. So it's just, I don't know.
Well, the reward
seemed good.
Right. The reward was worth the risk, which
Right.
is really insane. So one of the things that unfortunately happens is that for those people who are from Long Island and from the South Shore in particular, they know that there's a bridge on the way to Robert Moses State Park called the State Channel Bridge.
Yes.
And one of the things that we hear about, unfortunately, at least every year, is
Yeah.
somebody jumping off the bridge at the wrong tide. You have to do it at high tide. If you do it at low tide, you can hit the bottom and literally break your neck. End up as, if you're lucky, as a quadriplegic. I'm not sure that's lucky. I think
Yeah.
it's lucky if you die right away.
Yeah.
But I don't mean to insult or embarrass any
No, no.
quadriplegics, but I just, I can't consider that as a possible way to really get along. So they do it. Why do they do that? Well, because the fact that their friends look at them as being a hero, they interpret up here as being, that's worth the risk.
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, you could be a hero a lot of different
You
ways.
can be a hero
I mean,
a lot of different
If
ways.
you're a brilliant musician, you can play rock music, you're a hero.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
why do that? And there are other things that are done that way. And to some extent, society has benefited by the willingness of young people to take risks. Look at flight.
Yes.
The risk of dying from a jump of 60 feet is nearly 100%. We call it the LD, lethal dose 100. LD 100, about 6 stories, 60 feet. That was the height of the first flight of the Wright brothers, was 60 feet. Come on, are you kidding me? They're up in this heavier-than-air craft. Nobody's ever done it before. Actually, that's not true. I understand somebody else across the world had done it. But the point is that, so we benefited from it. But probably throughout time there are instances where we benefited from it. Some of the Cleopatra was 8 to 12 years old, 12 when she committed suicide. I think was current popular thought. And Alexander the Great was a young guy also, and there was a lot that we got out of this. But
that's less
nowadays,
than 1%.
Yeah, and that's a major problem.
Yeah.
And so while we benefited from it, we nowadays have to take into account, what is the downside of this experimentation, and how do we approach kids and teach them that this is not the place to take the chance. It may be you take a chance by learning how to walk a tightrope because the reward is going to be an Olympic gold medal or something like that. But to use a narcotic or an illegal drug, or to even use alcohol, we kept forgetting about that.
Alcohol is still the number one killer.
Right, and below age 21, it still affects the brain.
Yes.
It affects your memory, it affects your coordination, and it affects all of the other aspects of normal thought processes that you can think of.
And in a young athlete,
And in a young athlete, it's
one night of drinking
powerful.
negates 14 days of peak performance training.
And for an adult, one night of getting drunk requires 4 days before you're back to a normal functioning level. So if you get drunk on Sunday and you're working, you don't work normally until Thursday, even though you're there. There was a nice study on that. But even though you're at work, you do not function at the same capacity that you would have if you had not become drunk. I'm not talking about having a social drink. I'm talking about getting drunk.
Okay.
Not until 4 or 5 days later do you actually start to recover from that. So, it's not to say that, people who went out and got drunk are going to die young. I mean, things happen. It's a
Right.
function of, can you control it? Is it something that you've done once in a year or once or twice a year, and it was special circumstances and you didn't realize it was happening until it happened, and and you swore you were
Things
so sick you
happen.
wouldn't do it again, right? And
Right.
stuff like that. Or are you a person who intends not to have more than one or two and ends up having 7 or 8?
Right.
That's a whole different issue, and that became, whether you get drunk or not is not the issue. The issue is, do you have control? And that's where these drugs become a problem, and that is that they become self-perpetuating, or self-reinforcing is the term I wanted to use. So what happens is the brain gets hijacked.
Yes.
It's hijacked by the
Kidnapped.
by the drug, and that we're starting to find out exactly how it happens in the brain, and that's where the science of addiction is starting to catch up with the disease, and that's why we're starting to recognize that this is a disease and not willful misconduct. It's going to be a long time before we get everybody in
Believing that.
in that mode, and unfortunately, for many people, that prevents their seeking treatment
The
because they
shame
don't
and
want to admit
stigma
it.
of it, not,
Right. And even those in treatment
yeah.
don't want to, and so we've protected them every way we can in order to foster them staying in treatment or seeking treatment. We have all these rules and regulations about who you can tell, who you can't tell, what you can say, what you can't say, when you have someone in treatment, to protect them. At some point in time, we don't do that for people with diabetes.
No, we don't.
I mean, we don't go out and shout their health care to the world.
Correct.
But certainly,
But-
if you're sitting around the table and your diabetic friend is about to take a piece of cake, you probably would say, "What, are you nuts?" I mean,
Exactly.
how
Exactly.
could you do that? But we don't do that if your alcoholic friend is going to have his 3rd or 4th drink. We sort of back away from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And it is the shame and stigma that isolates people from really connecting with treatment or sharing it with family and friends, because it's looked upon as a moral failing
Yeah.
when it
So-
is not.
And that's where we're starting to catch up with it. So let's think in terms of the most basic instincts that we have. And why do we have them? We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to reproduce, we need salt as a basic instinct.
Really?
Yeah, we just found that out a few years ago. So you don't have to teach people about it. They know that they need some salt or something. And those instincts were put there, or developed, I should say, or put there, depending upon what you believe, in order to ensure the propagation of the species. Okay. So now, after you've had a good night's sleep, you feel good. You wake up, or after you had a good meal, you feel good.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the question is, well, why do you feel good? Well, we got a feel-good center in our brain, and we release a neurotransmitter, that's a chemical, that goes from one area of the brain to the next area of the brain and says, now that I've arrived here, I want you to make that person feel good. Oh, great, I had a good meal, I feel good. I slept, I feel good. And everybody knows that feeling. Okay, what if I put a chemical in there that stimulated that without you eating or sleeping? Feel good.
Feel good.
Okay, I feel good. Oh, that's wonderful. I feel good. I think what I'll do is I don't need to take it now. I'll wait till next week, and then I'll try it again. Oh, I feel good again. And what happens is that experimentation starts to be something you anticipate and look forward to. And yet at the same time you say, but I can control this.
Yeah.
Okay? And what happens now is that the brain starts to get used to it also. And it now releases some other hormones and has other hormones under control, or neurotransmitters is really what I meant. I don't mean hormones. But neurotransmitters, and you start to lose control of that. And now the brain, recognizing that there has been a difference, starts to change its structure in terms of how many receptors are there to receive this.
Okay.
Sometimes it increases in one area, sometimes it decreases in another area. And you go from this control to no control, and from no control to the addiction. Now, when you get to the addiction potential, it now gets to a little part of the brain that measured the risk and reward, and it changes it.
Yes.
Literally, physically changes it. And now you do not associate your alcohol or your heroin or your pills with what's happening to you.
Right.
Not only that, but your brain says you have to have this or you can't survive. And because it also affects other areas of the brain related to moral judgment, certain things happen. So it becomes more important for you to get your drug than to worry about what's happening to the other guy because of what you did.
Absolutely.
And so you get somebody shooting 4 people.
Even within your own family.
Within your own
How
family.
you treat your mom and dad, your brothers and sisters, stealing from people that you
Absolutely.
love, that
Yeah.
you just, and I can say that from my own experience with my son. There was my son, who I miss every second of every day, and Thomas the addict, who I would tell him if he was sitting right here, I don't miss him any second of any one day, because he was a mean son of a gun.
Yeah.
But that wasn't him.
No,
That was,
that was the
the drug.
change, and the drug does,
Yes.
and what people don't understand is the drug actually does that.
yes,
It changes the brain. It changes your
Demeanor,
moral
everything.
stance. It does a whole bunch of things, and yet you have no control of it. Literally no control. So you wake up in the morning, and I'll bet you say, "I don't want to be an addict today," but your brain says, "But you need that fix, whatever that fix is, whether it be
Whatever it is,
alcohol or
correct.
heroin or pills or whatever." What we're starting to see now is addiction to marijuana. Whether or not we're ever going to get to the point of calling it a true addiction, I think we probably will get there, because what's happening is the strength of the drug, of the chemical, is so strong now that it can become a true addiction. When it's weak, it's a little bit hard to
But
say it. But now we're seeing withdrawal.
I mean, with marijuana too, in today's world, it's laced with so many other things anyway. For a customer base that's going to be returning to the dealer, and or just, to control people. I heard a horrific story last week. Kim Lauby and I presented in Sag Harbor, and it was a young girl who became friends with the dealer, beautiful young girl, so he started to smoke pot with her. But he laced her pot with heroin.
Yeah.
So when he would say, "Oh, I'm going to come over, we'll smoke," she started to anticipate. She was very excited to always. And then one day he said, "You would really love if I injected you with heroin." And from that moment on,
She was up.
yeah.
Those are horrendous stories. And now, of course, we have synthetics.
Yes.
And that's
Which is
another.
a whole
And that's
other
a chemical.
ballgame.
Those are chemicals, and there again, you really don't know what you're getting.
You have no
Because they're
idea.
bathtub chemists. They
Yes.
mix it up.
Yeah. And the kids are dying. Kids are in psychotic breaks. They're not
That's a
coming back from
psychotic
that.
break. That's drug induced. You don't have to be schizophrenic to get into that problem.
Right.
That's especially now with some of these things. The bath salts are probably even worse.
And that you can buy at any gas station.
They used to, and I'm
There's
sure you
still-
still can.
You still can,
But
unfortunately.
you probably
I
have to go behind the counter.
Yeah, they're doing a really good job at trying to shut that down,
Yeah.
but these are all avenues that are not going to get shut down.
And they keep inventing new ones.
Absolutely.
So, and now, of course, I'm sure you're aware that some of the chemicals that have been used for thousands of years by various civilizations and cultures are now becoming, the in sort of thing that from like, kratom or some of the other salvia, some of the other agents that cat chewers from.
And there are
and-
people
and,
that say they get relief from those drugs, adults,
Oh yeah.
but,
Yeah. But it's a difference. The difference between a cultural use and an illegal use. In the cultural use, obviously, it's not illegal, and it has some benefits. In fact, there was an estimate that the Inca Indians actually, when they chewed cocaine, got more vitamin C than they did cocaine, even though they knew the effect of the cocaine. And in fact, they knew it so well, it was under the auspices of the king. You couldn't chew coca leaves unless the king said it was okay. And he would say it was okay if, number one, they was going into battle, because they
Okay.
fought better, or number two, he had to send a message between two towns, And the runner, of course,
Ran
would do better
faster.
if they didn't eat or sleep. And they ran faster. Right. And the Spaniards took over. They actually fed it to them to work in the mines without eating, without feeding. So, but cocaine was around a long time.
Yeah.
The morphine's been around for 5,500 years.
Yeah.
And the Greek gods, in fact, the pictures of Nyx as the goddess of night is always shown with poppies in her hand. I mean, they knew what they were doing.
They knew what they were doing.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's really fascinating.
It is. It is fascinating.
But cultures use this, and in fact, they knew about addiction back in the time of Hippocrates, and so
Interesting.
yeah, they knew about it. There's commentary alluding to it, and there's commentary, actually lots of commentary alluding to the use of wine, which is what they used. I'll tell you another interesting fact for you.
I'm going to hold you and we'll be right back after this message.
All right, I'll get it to him.
Welcome to Formula Auto Wash, where every day is a great day for a car wash. Open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Sundays 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Detailing packages for every budget, starting out at $29.99. 100% hand wash and detail centre. Horsehair and microfiber brushes and mitts. Proudly using Ecolab Blue Coral soaps and waxes. Formula Auto Wash has served the community for over 30 years. Senior discounts all day, every day. Ladies' Day Wednesday, $3 off any wash. Early bird discount Monday through Thursday till 9:30 a.m. Check out our website, formulaautowash.com.
provider on Long Island, with the most inventory in stock, including vinyl, chain link, and aluminum. Offers a custom powder-coated system that prevents rust throughout the life of the fence. We carry fence tools to the trade. We even stock wood, rail, and glass hardware as well. Shannon Gates has our very own patented locking system. The next time you need fencing of any sort, both commercial and private, give Shannon Gates a call at 631-392-4330. You can also visit our website at shannongatesinc.com.
You smell so good, I won't have to bathe the next 2 weeks.
Yay!
Anything. So, here, laugh a little harder. All right?
I will take him. I would be proud to show you off, you little old weirdo man.
Get a new sweater. The worst dressed man here tonight. Right? Look, get that laugh, and get it in there tonight because nobody else is gonna laugh like her. She's under drugs, all right?
Welcome back to Long Island in Crisis. You know, I wish they filmed what we talk about off air too, but to please share that story with.
All right. So the interesting thing about some of the addictions is that The oldest recipe, written recipe, known to mankind was written on a Babylonian stone tablet, and it's for beer. So as virtually every civilization in
yes.
the world has had some sort of beer. They could call it whatever they want, but it was beer. And so, you know, we're not talking about something that's new in modern
Right.
days. It's been around, and there were all sorts of, you know, comments from some of the Greek philosophers on how much, you know, not to drink too much wine, and some very interesting, insightful statements about what that would do to, does do to you, etc. But at the same time, you know, that doesn't help us right now. And what we were talking about off air was how do we approach our kids in terms of explaining to them, especially in view of what I said about their risk-taking behavior, which is normal.
And you know, as a parent, if you take a step back and your 12-year-old is looking to smoke pot or drink beer, we have to start thinking about that they're 12. And 12 is still a baby. So why does this child want to escape? They're not doing it for any other reason because they don't want to feel, and they do want to feel happy. Why don't they feel happy? And that's, as a society, I think we have to take a look at what are we doing? Why are we in such a rush to grow them up? Why so many fast decisions for them?
Well, we have a number of problems there.
Yeah.
Number one, as everybody who's been through high school knows, in the old days, youngsters are the people who took care of everything. I mean, at age 12, the girl went through her puberty and was expected to get pregnant, and in fact did get pregnant. So that was, you know, boys at age 13, 14 were out there working as men. And as we said before, you know, Alexander the Great was not a
Yes.
very old man. And so the issues are, modern times actually hold back biology to some extent, and we have outlets to take care of that, but they don't seem to be geared to our kids anymore. I'm not sure whether we've lost contact with them or it's just the normal progress of the human race that, you know, each generation has a different sort of take on it. But I agree that we need an environmental change in order to affect some sort of a decent mass recovery from this disease. No question about it. And there's a really good experiment that occurred as an observation, again, in Vietnam. You know, Vietnam and Southeast Asia is a hotbed of heroin. That's
Yes.
where they manufactured it, et cetera. And so many of the troops that we sent over to Vietnam started using heroin. In fact, the estimates are that it was about 20%, 1 out of every 5, a huge number, huge
Wow.
number. So what the Army said was, okay, if you're a heroin user, we're not bringing you stateside. We're going to treat you right there in Southeast Asia. And that's what they did. And then they brought them back here. And the fascinating thing is that only 5% of those soldiers who went into recovery with that methodology relapsed when they got here. The relapse rate for those people hooked on heroin in this country is 95%.
Yes.
5%. It's an environmental change. That's what it's attributed to, an environmental change. You know, so, and it was a whole big environmental change. Number one, people weren't shooting at them. Number two, it wasn't so readily available.
Correct.
Number three, their friends weren't doing it. They were back here. They had other, other things. But you know, it's interesting because they had the disease. They were users, at least in addicts, or addicts at least, and users at best. And so that 5% is important. But what it teaches us is that we probably get our biggest bang for the buck by changing the environment. Mm-hmm. That's what they did with cigarettes. They changed the environment. They made it illegal to get them. They made it impossible to find a place to smoke. That was legal. They advertised. They started kids out in kindergarten or first grade with these
They
reasons.
empowered children
Right.
to
And
come home and say,
so I
please
stopped
don't
smoking.
smoke.
That was me.
Yeah.
I stopped because my daughter came home and said, "You got to stop smoking." So how could I refuse her?
Exactly.
I think that when we look at this aspect of it, we have to look in terms of what could we do globally. Globally, I mean for our children to change the environment. And you brought up a point in the intermission about the stress they're under.
Yes.
And I think we all agree to that. They're
Yes.
under tremendous stress and
You know,
to make decisions that are life-changing at a time when they're not prepared to make it. So if you say to a kid, even if we take an older kid, like a kid going into college, 18 years old on average, and say to them when they enter in their freshman year, you got to declare a major. Are you kidding me? I don't know what I want to be. I'm just going to college now to find out about what the opportunities are, and you want me to declare a major.
I just left home. I don't even know how to pick up my own socks yet. You know,
much less wash them.
Exactly. So we're asking, and that's not a blanket statement. There are going to be a percentage that know exactly what they want to do and exactly where they want to go. That goes without saying. But we're putting so many demands on, the description that I got from a senior in high school is she's up at 5:30 in the morning to get ready to be at school by 7:15. She goes through her classes. She plays a sport, so she has practice. She has a job. By the time she gets home, it's maybe 6, 7 o'clock at night. So she's already been out of the house 12 hours. She has 3 to 4 hours worth of homework. When is she having fun with
and
this?
what kind of relaxation does she need?
And she's not getting any relaxation, so now she's going to bed 12, 1 o'clock in the morning and getting up at 5 o'clock again. They're exhausted, and they just get added more and more and more onto them. And then, of course, mom and dad want you to have great SAT scores, be a scholar athlete, join a club, do this, do that, because the Jones down the street, their kid does it, so you should be able to do it. So,
I don't have an answer.
I know, but it is an observation, and I try to share with parents, even with my 3 kids, 3 very different kids. So we'll use Thomas. He could be between an 85 and a 90 student, easily. I asked an 80 of him. This way, he's not burning himself out. It's not going to be a fight. So when he would bring home in the 60s, and he'd say, well, I passed, I go, but you didn't do half of your best. If you could only get a 65, we'd be celebrating this grade. But you can do better, so you should do better. I think we just need to relook at what demands do we put on our kids and let them earn their own grades.
Well,
let them lead their direction.
Well, to get back on subject, and I agree, this is definitely related. One of the theories behind developing an addiction is a need to seek relief from stress. And indeed, if the drug gives you that relief, then that becomes your mechanism. And that's what we're seeing happening.
That's what we're seeing.
When on Friday nights and Saturday nights and some of these parties and raves, et cetera, and that's not necessarily bad. In fact, they could be good. But once they introduce drugs and alcohol, then it becomes
They all need an outlet to come together, to have fun, to blow off steam. And what are the first things that we cut in schools? Sports and the arts.
Yeah.
And these are the activities that they do blow off steam.
Mm-hmm.
But they have such a high level of anxiety. Anxiety about how they look, how they're going to interact with their peers, never mind the opposite sex. And then just this anxiety about getting everything done. It's okay if they lay on the couch and watch TVs once in a while. That's a good thing for them to do. So we do need a cultural shift away from...
I think we get our biggest bang for the buck there. In the meantime, while we're working on that kind of thing, we have some specific treatments available. We have the psychosocial component to this. Mm-hmm. One of the things we have to understand is that once they get beyond what you're describing and start to use, we're running into this complex brain disease.
Yes.
And the operant word is complex. It really is complicated. I simplified it in the beginning by describing what goes on, but the point is that it really is a very complex thing affecting areas of the brain that is so important to normal everyday functioning that you can't possibly function in a normal everyday fashion once the brain's been hijacked like that. So the issue then becomes one of, okay, can we stop the chemical need, and do we have things to do that? Well, we definitely have three things in terms of narcotics. We have methadone, which is a narcotic itself, but is an acceptable form because it's oral, and it blocks the craving, and it actually permits people to function. Problem is that because of the way it's dispensed, frequently that functioning is curtailed by the need to present yourself daily, at least initially, and then over the course of time, depending on the program, you may be able to get away with at least once a month, but that's it. Then we have buprenorphine, which is a partial agent, meaning that it acts in part like a narcotic and in part like a narcotic antagonist. And that may be difficult for the layperson to wrap their head around, but from a medical standpoint, there are other things that work like that. And so since it has a ceiling effect, you can build to that ceiling, and no matter what the patient takes, it won't make them feel any different. So that is a blocking agent because it's got a higher affinity for the receptor than does the other narcotic. And then we have an antagonist, and that is naltrexone, which probably people have heard the term Vivitrol, which is the brand name, but it's really naltrexone. And that drug can be delivered by an injection. Actually, now there's a newer way. It can be implanted under the arm. It works for about 6 months.
That's great.
$6,000. It's the same thing as getting a shot. but it's okay. I mean, yes, for certain people, it's pretty good. It can't be abused because it's an antagonist. It blocks the effect of the narcotic, so the narcotic can't be used. It has some effect on craving, but mostly its effect on craving is that why should I bother using it? It's not going to give me a high anyway. That's not really a good thing.
That's not really a
but
good...
it's better than nothing.
It's a good start.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a good start.
And then, of course, we have the psychosocial components to it. And for nicotine, of course, we have the varenicline, which is a nicotine blocking agent, so that's available. We don't really have anything available for amphetamines or cocaine or for the psychedelics, and they have their issues also. But our understanding as to how to block it is a little bit behind, and that's partly due to the way these things work. The main thing with cocaine is they tried to make an antibody to cocaine, and it looked like it might work, but it didn't.
Okay.
So that takes care of that.
Again, when we talk about kids, and when I go and visit a facility that treats 12 to 20-year-olds, and that breaks my heart every time I say that age, that a kid that's 12 years old is in a treatment facility for up to a year, if they're lucky, to cure an addiction.
Yeah. Or to put it in recovery.
Yeah. To put them into recovery at the age of 12 is heart-wrenching.
Yeah. But positive side,
yes,
in 2 years, if they can stay clean for 2 years, there's indications that those receptors that have been changed in the brain return towards, not to normal, but return towards normal, so that the desire to use or to relapse becomes less and less as you get further and further away, which is one of the problems, as you know, we're having in terms of convincing people and their insurance companies that we need long-term, we need more time to work in the acute phase than just a few days. And in fact, the new laws now have gone a long way. Governor Cuomo signed the bill that
so up to 14 days.
Gives you 14 days before there can be review.
Yes.
And it's actually 3 weeks is what you get. I think that's pretty good. The issue there is, of course, you have to fall into a certain cubbyhole in order to get that 2 to 3 weeks. But it's okay because the program they set up to assess you is comprehensive enough so that very few people who need it would slip between the cracks. And
Well, that's been the goal,
Oh,
because
and
since 2014, the insurance companies learned all the loopholes
right, exactly.
to still throw
So
people
now
out of
they've
treatment.
shut those down, and Schneiderman has done a great job in
has
terms
done a
of
great
going
job.
after the
Yes.
people who've been a little
You
lax.
know, and it's crazy because if they spent the money up front, their outcome would be so much better.
Yeah. I
So
think they're
they're-
starting to recognize that. Yeah.
I would hope that the other side of that I would love to see is if a doctor prescribed the medication that caused the addiction. Can we look at that piece too? You know, that's what they should be looking at too.
Well,
When those reviews should come into play a lot sooner. Why is this person on, long
long
term?
term. So now the law
But
provides
we're gonna talk about that in 1 second.
Okay.
We'll be right back after this message.
Welcome to Formula Auto Wash, where every day is a great day for a car wash. Open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Sundays 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Detailing packages for every budget, starting out at $29.99. 100% hand wash and detail centre. Hogshair and microfiber brushes and mitts. Proudly using Ecolab Blue Coral soaps and waxes. Formula Auto Wash has served the community for over 30 years. Senior discounts all day, every day. Ladies' Day Wednesday, $3 off any wash. Early bird discount Monday through Thursday till 9:30 a.m. Check out our website, formulaautowash.com. Welcome to
Luxury Coach is a full-service limousine and party bus company. Family-owned and operated, we are an industry leader with over 25 years of experience in providing best-in-class luxury transportation for your special event. Whether it's your precious wedding day, an all-day wine tour out east, your high school prom, that special birthday, or just an amazing night on the town, our professional chauffeurs stand ready to ensure your special event is truly special. Galaxy Luxury Coach has one of the largest and modern party bus fleets in the New York area. Our party buses are simply nightclubs on wheels. Concert sound systems, light shows, lasers and strobes, multicolor LED lighting brilliantly lights your party bus inside and out. For corporate and more laid-back events, we will cater to your specific needs and requests. What sets Galaxy aside from all others in the luxury transportation industry is our attention to detail in customizing our services to your special event. At Galaxy, it's all about you and your guests. Galaxy customers return time and time again because they know they can trust Galaxy to help deliver those lifetime memorable moments. Step aboard and let your Galaxy experience begin. Galaxy.
Welcome to the Rehab Center located at 2025 Brentwood Road in Brentwood, New York. At the center, we offer chiropractic services, acupuncture, and physical therapy. We take most major medical, no-fault, and workers' comp insurance. If you need these types of services, contact the offices at 631-234-4949. That's 631-234-4949.
For professional motorcycle transport and towing, think Kickstart Fabrications Motorcycle Towing. Proudly serving all of Long Island, we feature expert handling and 24/7 service. So send a limo for your toy with Kickstart Fabrications Motorcycle Towing.
Welcome back to Long Island in Crisis. So I'm sorry I cut you off before.
I don't even remember what I was saying.
Oh, okay. So we get off topic when we go off air.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
we have to get parents and kids. We just have to start doing this cultural environmental shift. Is really the point of what we're, you as parents, we all want the best for for those little angels that get born into our lives. So if you want them to be a scholar athlete, in the same breath as you say, I want them to be a scholar athlete, you can't also say, oh, they're only drinking and smoking pot, it's okay. Because they're not going to rise to the level that they would have without the introduction of a drink or a drug, right?
Yeah.
Their brain will not. I saw the damage. I really did. And it was actually the night before Tom passed. Such a sharp, bright kid. And I could see that he wasn't that on that edge anymore. And I always thought to myself, with time, I would think that could regenerate itself. Not that he was, someone else may have not noticed that. I noticed it because I knew who he was.
So there's no question that the neighborhood is a part of the problem when it comes to addiction. When I say the neighborhood, I don't necessarily mean a ghetto or a poor neighborhood. It's community attitude.
Yes.
And that's been written about in sort of the social literature about community attitude and what is a community attitude towards using these substances. And in communities where there's an active sociologic component that says we don't approve of this, there's less addiction than in communities where the back is turned and said, people will do what people will do.
Right.
You
Or
can't do that.
as long as they're drinking in my house, I'll keep an eye on them.
Oh, that's another issue altogether, and that is and that's problematic for most parents.
Yes.
Because they would prefer, and you're talking about 18-year-olds, and most parents of 18-year-olds had a drinking age of 18 when they were young. Now
Correct.
the drinking age is 21, and so between 18 and 21, they say, gee, so if they're going to drink, let them drink in my house. The problem is that may be better than letting them drink out somewhere else, but it's not better in terms of you giving permission.
Correct.
That's a whole other ballgame.
Right.
So I understand where they're coming from. It's not an easy answer.
There's no easy
But it
answers.
requires effort. You got to put the time in. You have to describe why you think this is a bad idea, etc. And some people say, well, if they're at age 18, they can join the army and go out and fight our wars and get killed. How come they can't drink? Well, the answer is they can. They're on an army base. They can drink at age 18. But that doesn't make it right.
That doesn't make it right.
And that's not really the answer. I just want people to understand that, yeah, we understand that they're risking their lives, and yes, there are some perks, if you will, even though it's probably not a good one. I mean, in the old days, they used to supply every serviceman with a carton of cigarettes in the K rations. I mean, that was part of the K rations, a carton of cigarettes, and that wasn't a good idea either. So there were certain things that are just not good ideas. Nevertheless, we need to get the communities, because remember, it's environment again. You get your biggest bang for your buck. It's not the cure-all, but
No,
it
it
does
isn't.
sort of alert people to the fact that we don't like this, we will not tolerate it, and if you do it, you're aberrant. You're not part of this community, and you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. And that sometimes helps.
It does help. Working with Kim, you're protected. Kids feel protected. Family, peers, community, religious organization. That's their boundaries. So you need to fit in all of those things. I just notice, when my son wrestled or when Thomas played lacrosse, there would be parents that we'd go to tournaments and they would bring a cooler. So if it's okay for my parents to drink and party and everything else, why isn't it okay for me? Because you're their biggest influence for their whole life, whether they readily admit to that or not. But when young children, 3 and up, notice that when you come home and say I had a bad day and have a glass of wine or have a drink, and every day that when they turn 12 and they say, I had a really bad day at school, I think I'll have a beer. That's a learned behavior. So we need to teach them the healthy healthy decision making. What can you do when you had a bad day? Well, we can go for a walk, we can go for a run, we can go for a bike ride. We could just sit and eat a gallon of ice cream.
Forgot about classical music.
Music, any of the other arts, right? Anything
Absolutely.
else
Anything
other than
that relaxes you.
Anything that relaxes you. Let's go to a movie, let's eat, whatever it is, your comfort.
I'd like to agree that going to a movie relaxes you. Could you name one?
I know. But
I mean, there's some cartoon movies. They may be relaxing.
absolutely. But we need to change where we're going, how we're steering this ship, because what we are doing today is not working.
Yeah.
The shame and the stigma, parents not also being a part of a community anymore. Communities really used to do a lot more with each other. Now people are working 2 jobs. Families are stressed that way, but we're not communicating with one another. Everybody's on their phone. Put the phone down and talk to other, because when parents get together and say, oh, you don't like when they go hang out behind the food store either, and there's 10 parents, that when your kid comes home and says, well, everybody else is doing it. No, they're not, because I just talked to these other 10 parents, and we all decided that that's not an okay activity for you anymore. So when you start shutting down those areas where you know it's not a good idea for them to be, but you don't want them to feel ostracized, because that's all part of being a teenager too.
Yes.
It's very important for them to feel like they fit in.
So I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that comes back to environment again.
Yes.
But you mentioned something also that's really, really important that we have to address as a society, and that is the stigma.
Yes.
We don't look at a fat person who's diabetic and say, oh, look at you, that's why you got this disease. I mean, we may do that somewhere, but
you deserve that
right.
disease. You made a choice to get that disease.
But we don't do that. And that's
right.
And when you look at it from that standpoint, about 60% of addiction is probably genetically determined. The other 40% is environmental. About 60% of adult onset type 2 diabetes is genetically determined, and the other 40% is environmental, Western diet, high in carbohydrates, etc. So the issue then becomes, well, okay, we got a couple of diseases here. They seem to be similar. They are. One we call a disease, and we don't hold it against the person. And the other one, we are so disturbed by that we actually ostracize the person as almost being a leper, and we don't even want to hear from them. It's the end result is that the people with the disease try and hide it.
Yeah.
Actually, nobody's better at hiding it than physicians, and we have a problem with physicians. While the incidence in the general population of substance use disorders may be about 10%, it's 14% in physicians. That's a lot higher. 4% is a lot.
That's a lot.
And they're good at hiding it because they know what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So the problem is not necessarily with physicians only. The problem is with stigma. The problem is that if you're identified as having this disease, you can't get life insurance, you can't get motor vehicle insurance, so you pay a high premium for it. It's hard to get health care. It's hard to do a lot of things because you have this disease. It's not true of the diabetic, not true of the hypertensive. By the way, as an aside, the relapse rate for diabetes and high blood pressure is higher than it is for addiction. Higher. So I had some medical students say to me, it's a revolving door. It's not a revolving door. It's a disease that can be put into remission, and indeed, if you don't do that, they're going to die from it. And the fact of the matter is that you think it's a revolving door because you're working in an emergency department where you only see the worst cases.
Right.
You don't see that 20-something million Americans who are in recovery long term.
My first article that I wrote for Newsday, when I went online, and why I looked at comments, because I knew they weren't going to be good. He deserved to die. He asked for this. No kid. And then I said, this is ignorance at the upteenth level. And thankfully, I could say that to myself because that could destroy a lot of kids. What a horrible thing to say about anyone. But a 21-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, they didn't ask for this.
Yeah.
They didn't want it. They didn't decide. They didn't wake up and say, you know what, I think I'll be a heroin addict,
And take an
destroy
overdose.
my family,
Yeah.
and just send everybody into a tailspin. That's not what any person does in their right mind.
Yeah.
And if we just take it at that simplest form to understand, and I would say to a diabetic, you don't want to give up eating chocolate cake for the rest of your life. Well, the same thing for your counterpart. They don't want to give up their drug.
Chocolate cake. Huh.
Right? That's their chocolate cake. It's not easy.
And the brain has been changed.
Yes.
So it doesn't even associate the disease with the drug they're using. And so one of our biggest battles, and I anticipate, as I think I said in the beginning, is that it's going to take a long time
Yes.
for us to teach the entire population that this should not be any different in terms of your regard of the disease than it is for your regard of a diabetic or hypertensive or a patient with heart disease. It looks exactly the same.
Yes.
And indeed, to the extent that there are genetics involved and there's also willful misconduct involved with, overeating or eating salt or doing the wrong thing for your heart, etc. It's the same thing with addiction. And, why would you separate one out from the other? It's just absurd. I mean, I understand why. We did it, but we were wrong.
We were wrong.
And now we have to change that so that we can encourage people to get help
Yes.
for their disease. Not for their addiction, for their disease.
Their disease.
Right,
I like substance use disorder.
yeah. And that's
I'm gonna
what
close
DSM-5 is doing.
With just what you said, it's substance use disorder. It is a disease. It's not a moral failing. It's not any of those things. You should not be ashamed if your family member is struggling. And please reach out to anyone and everyone, because there is a family that will envelop you with love and support and help you on your way to recovery. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Another dark hotel room.